Good evening, everybody, and I want to welcome you to this Board of Education work session for Monday, October 14th, 2024. Also, I want to say Happy Indigenous Peoples Day, which is the day that we celebrate the people who first called this land home. So with us at the board table, we have a couple representatives from Intercity Student Council. Will you please introduce yourselves?
Good afternoon. My name is Andres Mora. I'm a senior at Preble High School, and I'm the Green Bay Intercity Student Council president.
Hi, my name is Ruby Guzman Gonzalez, and I'm a representative from East. I'm a senior at East.
Well, welcome. Okay, roll call. Kinsey?
Lee,
Here.
Crossan,
Here.
Gerlach,
Here.
Mills,
Here.
Lyerly,
Here.
McCoy,
Here.
Becker.
Here.
All right, everyone is present. The next thing on our agenda is the public forum. Is there anyone who wants to speak? Okay. We have updates with the referendum projects, but Kale is running a little late, so we're gonna have to reorder the agenda. Do we have to do a motion for that? I believe so. Okay, so let's put the referendum and I think he's also the Clean Energy Advisory Committee update. So let's put them. I would entertain a motion to put them after. How about after operations? Would that be okay? Can someone make that motion?
So moved.
Can I get, okay. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. So we're gonna move on to education and we'll do updates with Kale when he gets here. And I think we're going to be joined at the table. Yeah. Hi, David. Good evening. We're going to hear about school accountability update and early progress. Who's going to be? Okay, then Brian will be doing that. Okay, very good. Thank you.
Good evening, board. I'm happy to provide this update for you on the topic of academic accountability and equitable instruction. This really lays out in two parts. I want to speak a little bit to the, is that bar in the way there? Kinsey, is that stuck? Great. Two parts today and lots of opportunities for questions for you. I want to touch briefly on the state report card, go a little more in detail from the last conversation we had around the methodology that'll be used to determine scoring for schools and districts around the state. More importantly, I'd also like to begin using this as an opportunity to really look toward the future and to take a look at the data that we're collecting in the moment and the ability to work with that data and take more informed action as a result of what we're learning from our students with more frequency throughout the year. So we'll take a focus on Lexia, the Core 5 and Power Up components, as well as our secondary interim assessments. And again, lots of opportunities for questions as you may have them. So first, I'd like to take us back to the DPI report card. You've possibly seen some recent press that has shared some data, not only from our district, but from other districts. While that data was made available to the press, the data that we have at the school level, and obviously all the way down to the school level, remains embargoed, which means that I'm going to be able to refer to some generalities today, but not actually present you specific numbers. It'll be that the next time the board comes together for a work session is almost exactly when the state is expecting to release all of the data. And so I wanted to use this as an opportunity prior to that to talk a little bit about what we can expect to see. We talked last time about a major shift taking place in the formula and how proficiency or performance levels were determined. Not only were the names of those performance levels determined, but also the factors that were used to calculate how many students are in which group was modified as well. For the purposes of the report card, DPI has used a formula to adjust for that 1-year change, which essentially puts our performance last year back in the context of the performance of the 2 years prior. The reason why that's important is that a composite score is calculated over a 3-year period of time. And so with all that changed with this year's report cards, we would be introducing really an artificial number to that 3-year sequence if that number wasn't adjusted due to this formula. So what's calculated over the 3 years is a composite score. It's a single score for the district. The district report card treats the district like it's a giant school. And it takes all of the factors in consideration: achievement, growth, on track to graduation, and attendance as well, into the, priority group performance and on track to graduation together as one composite. The district and the schools are still rated using that composite score, and all of them have had the formula modified to apply for the 3 years. Some trends I'd like to share with that you can expect to see as our report card becomes public over the next month is that our composite score as a district has increased to the highest point in the last 4 years. And so that's a COVID forward measurement with our composite score, which again represents those 4 categories. More of our schools have moved into the exceeds expectation zones, and fewer of our schools are in the lowest performance band, which is fails to meet expectations. Some of the factors that we attribute this to, because remember, this is the story of last school year. This is the story of last school year. This is the time of year when DPI report cards kind of come back into conversation, but always remembering it's the story of last year's performance. Some of the factors that those are attributed to, there's a really large scope that we can examine. First of all, a stronger emphasis on continuous improvement processes, more individuals at the school level involved in continuous improvement processes. These are the annual goals that schools set, and then the short cycle intervals of about 100 days that schools revisit that goal and revisit their practices. An overall goal orientation with a focus on equity in our we've taken efforts to expand data literacy and assessment literacy. Those really go hand in hand. What is this tool I'm using, and what is the information it can provide me, and what should I do with what I learned from it? We did expand the pilot of the literacy materials along with the Lexia platform starting in the winter of last year. So we did have some schools that had a few months using the materials before the state assessment series kicked in as well. So not a scientific correlation by any means, but just wanted to share with you some high-level efforts that I can tell you give us more confidence as we move forward. Everything I named is common to where we are right now in our work, and I'll share some of those in the second half. I pause here for any questions that you have.
I have one, actually, I have a couple that I'll be asking throughout, but you had mentioned that the assessments that the staff are giving to the students, and as a board, we've kind of worked to decrease that to make sure that we can use the data on a regular basis. Can you tell us what you think how that's going to directly relate to the state assessments, and just kind of dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, thank you for the question. This idea of from what happens day to day in the classroom all the way through the state assessment is tricky, and our effort is always to try to be as predictive as we can. One thing you can't go wrong with is aligning your instruction to the standards and making sure that you're assessing the standards for the grade level. So the state assessment is certainly grounded in the standards. It's why you approve the course documents every year, because we make sure that they're current with the standards that are in place. So in terms of predictability, the very best thing that our staff can do is remain focused on those grade level performance standards in their planning and how they make use of the materials that you've purchased and adopted. And then to ground their conversations with each other in student performance as it relates to the standards. Anything that we are providing staff by way of assessment tools and technology-based instruments allow them to drill into that standard level of performance. And I'll have a couple of examples of that to show you. Okay, thank you. So as we transition to the second half of this update, I want to ground it in the same set of priorities that we had last school year. A little over a month ago, when I shared our district goals with you for reading, math, attendance, social emotional development, I grounded those in the things that we're working on doing really, really well as to be our actions so that we achieve the goals that we shared. These are the actions that were shared with you then. These are the actions that we remain committed to through our professional development, through our work with school leaders, in how we have conversations based on visiting classrooms. What I'm going to share with you in terms of our progress and the tools we're using to make progress really is a thread that runs through all of these. In response to your question, Mr. Mills, equitable instruction is grounded in grade level standards. And so first and foremost, that's where we need to make sure everything is centered. You have adopted and held us to a high standard to implement only high quality instructional materials. And so learning about and making use of those materials in ELA and math especially are important parts of our strategy. And then, of course, this idea of technology being an efficiency maker is central to a couple of the tools that I'll share with you. And all of this happens and all of this is more efficient so that we can provide more timely responses to needs, either a single teacher with a group of students or several adults working together in an inclusive classroom. So as we track towards success, I want to share with you first some data around the use of Lexia. When you adopted our K-8 English Language Arts program late last spring, it was inclusive of a platform called Lexia Power Up and Lexia Core 5. This is a computer-based program that is adaptive, which means as students answer a few questions in it, it starts to change the type of questions based on student responses. It's meant to constantly create that edge of learning for students. It's rich with reports and platforms and different things that provide teachers and families that information they need to be timely in their support. After I share some profile of our Lexia participation and progress, then I'll switch to the secondary interim assessments where we've made some great advances and teachers have done some really phenomenal work to try to increase that predictability around if this is what we're seeing on these interim assessments, then this might be what we see or is more likely what we see toward the end of the year. This is a report from Lexia Core 5. Lexia Core 5 is used in our elementary schools. It's the program that we trialed in 5 of our schools last year. And I will say that as it relates to state report cards, in all 5 of those schools, we had accelerated progress, even with the use of Lexia in place for just several months. One of the things we pay attention to is usage. So in Lexia, usage is expected to be approximately 60 minutes per week. And so imagine that distributed over a school week of 5 days. So what we're seeing here in the green line graph is the percentage of our students who are meeting that mark or higher. It doesn't mean that there aren't other students using it, but these are the students who logged in and met that usage mark. And you see that as we've moved to universal use of Lexia, that's a considerable number of our students, 7,470 on September 30th, using this reading enrichment program. Well, it doesn't just matter that they use it. It matters that they use it and that we start to see some growth. And again, remember, this is the very personalized element of reading program. Our teachers are delivering really amazing lessons to the whole class. And then there's time built within the day for students to be involved in some self-directed steps. And I've personally stepped into classrooms where I've seen first grade students with their headphones on and earpieces in, and they're working away on Lexia. This idea that our students are quick and early adopters of these platforms has definitely played out through my observation. So what we see over on the right then is progress. And this is what we look at from the start of the year to some moment in time that we freeze. This one happens to be frozen at the end of the week that began September 30th, which is actually only a 4-day week. We didn't have school on the Friday of that week. So what we see here is we want to see that blue number grow over the year. That means that in Lexia, they are working in grade level materials. GLM means grade level materials. So that means the sophistication of the program is moving their reading level up as they start to demonstrate more mastery of certain skills. And so we want to see that blue expand every moment that we check in on it. And then we really like to see that purple expand as well. And so for the first week peeking in, we're able to see that we do have some students in that above grade level materials as well. A nice thing about Lexia is that it differentiates above grade level for students. So it doesn't mean you stop or the program shuts down. It provides reading materials that are very much based on student interest and allows them to continue to stretch their skills. That's core 5.
And I think that's a key part that you just killed my mic. I think that's a key part that we need to remember as a board as well, that there's a lot of focus on the students that are below grade level, and obviously we want to get that caught up as well. But to expand that top, in education, a lot of times people feel that may not be getting the attention needed. So the fact that this program is allowing us to find those students and get that purple band, which you can kind of see starting to come up there, I think is a huge benefit. And our team is doing a good job of making sure that's identified. So thank you.
That's core 5, and that's used in all of our elementary classrooms. In your visits or discussions with teachers or staff, please ask about it. And you're going to hear lots of people's journeys about supporting their students with this complement to our reading program. In middle school, we have something called Power Up. Our 6th graders use Power Up. The expected use of Power Up is 100 minutes per week. Now that sounds like, that is a larger number than in elementary school. One of the things that you may or may not know is that our 6th grade English language arts block is an extended block in our middle schools and has been for some time. And so we have built within the day extended time for our students to engage in the core reading instruction and then also reading enrichment, as you mentioned, Mr. Mills, for students who are strong readers and reading at or above grade level. And also reading support in the classroom. And so Power Up is the companion to Lexia. We have some 6th graders who were 5th graders in buildings last year that used core 5. And so that transition has been really smooth for them. Here we see our usage statistics through the end of the first week of October, and we're seeing lower patterns of use. It certainly is the kind of data we look to just get curious and get out to the field and really learn about what's happening in our 6th grade ELA classrooms. How is this fitting in to also the implementation of new curriculum? Let's remember that our adoption was through middle school. And so using the HMH materials is something that's happening all the way through middle school. What we get as a performance indicator coming out of Power Up is actually across the 3 domains of reading. We get word study, which is maybe closest associated with vocabulary. We get grammar and we get comprehension. The ideal use for students is across those 100 minutes to spend about equal time or balanced time across these 3 areas of their reading. This one gives you a little bit different report. So this one shows our students who are working in the foundational level, which is K2, our intermediate level, which is 3-5, these are grades, and our advanced level 6-8. Unlike core 5, The goal in Power Up is to have all purple bars because these are sixth graders doing this program. And so the highest level of performance here would be considered middle school grade level performance. And so that's what we're looking for. And we see some early progress with that as well. This is Power Up for our sixth graders. The next thing I'd like to share is a look in on our interim assessments. Our interim assessments are given in secondary school 3 times during the year. These are aligned to the standards for the actual course that's being offered. So we talk about grade level standards, usually through K-8. By the time we get to high school courses, then we get into the specific standards for that course. It was brought up a couple of board meetings ago around these efficiencies and how do the students access them and what is the opportunity for teachers to see what comes next. I also would like to feature the Canvas platform here. So this is a screenshot from an AP Geography student's Canvas dashboard. And you see that this interim assessment is pre-populated right in that week of 9/16 to 9/20, which is exactly our window for the first interim assessment. This is the cooperation and the support we have from our teachers that recognize the value of these and intentionally build them right into the course as just the next step along the path. So by clicking on this link, this student is able to access a very brief interim assessment that includes questions across all of the standards that are in the course, including some standards that maybe we haven't spent time with yet. Imagine the interim assessments as being this cup that has 3 designations on it, and the goal across 3 installments of these assessments is to fill up the cup a little bit more each time. So on this first one, we're looking for any evidence that our students are coming in with some schema or some previous experience or learning that are part of the grade level experience. That is such a valuable gift for our teachers to be able to know up front. We always enter into the year wondering what our kids know and wondering what's going to be a challenge for them this year. This gives us an idea with more certainty to be able to say, oh, this proves it. I can spend more time on this. I might not need to spend as much time on this. After the student launches and takes this, then a teacher through the companion to Canvas, which is called Mastery Connect. It's a tool that you adopted in partnership, Canvas first and then Mastery Connect. That's where the assessment piece lives. A teacher then gets a report like this. So this is a profile for an AP Human Geography course. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There are 8 power standards in the course. So the course is built on a backbone of 8 standards. And from this first installment, we can see that students, depending on standards, so these are all the student scores lumped together, and this is real time. So on that day that the student clicked on this and the teacher left 20 minutes for the whole class to take it, by the time those students left the classroom, the teacher had this report about student performance across all of the standards. So I really wanted to bring you into the student and teachers experience with the interim assessments. And we have some students here who perhaps have interim assessment experience under their belts.
Not this new system, but last year we did take like assessments similar to it.
I have not. I really haven't heard of it at all, but I'm interested in like being able to like use it later on. Yeah.
I would assume that this is it's broken down by student as well. So if you have an AP, what's this one? AP US Geography or Human Geography, you have 20 kids in it, you're going to be able to see the individual ones as well so that they're modifying that and their delivery with it as well.
Yeah, that's correct. You absolutely can. So you could see at the classroom level, each student with basically 3 bar graphs over the course of a year, incrementally working to grow toward meeting that standard.
And that standard is going to be also tied to the AP test that they're taking. So the students are going to be prepared for when they take the AP test. So they're getting their credits beforehand with it as well. And this is also is there opportunities for, say you're an AP, I gotta keep looking at which AP it is, human geography teacher at Preble, and you're gonna be able to collaborate with your AP human geography teacher at East or at Southwest and kind of see the trends as well? Does it give that opportunity district-wide as well?
For our teams that meet in the summer to do the jurying, so one of the things that comes out of this with this amount of data is the lead teachers in those subject areas can get together over the summer and see what the patterns and trends are universally across the district, and they can say, you know, our work was to prepare students, for example, for the AP exam, and then we would have to access that. In terms of real time, who has access kind of across the district, I'm not entirely sure.
I'm looking more at like an informal conversation with it. So if, because these classes are all taking place at roughly the same time with the testing, those teachers would be able to contact each other and say, listen, I'm missing out on this. What are you doing? If they wanted to, because they have that accurate data with them at that point, correct?
Yeah, that would be true. The advantage of the fairly tight window allows people to have a common conversation around the same trends that they may be seeing. You can also drill in at the question level. A development that's taken place over the last year across all of our interim assessments is that we've gone to nationally vetted question banks. Previously, our teachers have worked really hard to develop their own questions. And we've learned, again, the predictability means we need to really go to some of the questions that the experts in test design have written. The other advantage there is we can make sure we're asking them at the level of rigor that they're going to expect to see on the assessment. So those are all fine-tuning pieces that have evolved.
That's also going to help our students because the data is going to stick with the student, I would assume, correct, as they go through. So one of the things I've brought up multiple times on the board is that we, being a large district, we have students that move from building to building and class to class. So they're able to kind of still tie that in. So if a student goes from East to Preble and is at that same time, they would have a good understanding between the two assessments that we have, whether, you know, I'm looking at as an elementary level up, that it's going to keep that equity and ability to follow along with that student, correct?
Yeah, we're really careful when we vet any of the companion technology pieces that it would talk through our student information system, and that as the student may move around within some reasonable amount of time, that data can track with them as well. So access first showed you how a student and how a teacher make use of these results. This is about participation, and this might be why our friends have not yet seen their interim assessment this year. These are our participation rates comparing fall of 2023 and fall of 2024. Now, one way to make increased participation come about is to double down on the heavy-handed expectation that you're supposed to be doing the interim assessments. Yes, the interim assessments are an expectation in the courses where they exist. What I would attribute these increased rates to, and that's the red bar that shows the fall participation, is increasing involvement in using the data that comes out, therefore a greater belief in the value of taking that 20-minute time in class to be able to get this snapshot of student progress. And so the high quality use of interim assessments is something that feeds the system and will continue to grow the use of it. This pattern pretty much matches what we see in other subject areas as well. High middle school participation, 9th, and then we see a little bit of tapering off due to a variety of factors. Could include attendance, could include stamina. Yeah, I'm just speculating at that point. All right, so then the system-wide look at the interim assessments allows us to make some comparisons. So because this connects with our student information system, we can filter and sort by grade level, by any other demographic factors that we use. This happens to show the story of 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade science. And as you look from right to left, we see a sizable blue bar of developing. because this is the first interim assessment of this year of a course that students have never had before, that's right where they should be. If we're teaching them anything new, chances are they're in the developing or approaching level. We do have some students on particular standards showing that they're meeting as well. In this particular visualization using Mastery Connect, we're able to identify any one of our student groups. And in this particular case, we've isolated our Black African American group because that is our priority focus area to look at relative performance in 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade science classes. This is just an example of how that data can be represented. You see the numbers there that represents as well. The reason why I'm showing this and making the connection to the priority performance group is that all of our science assessments require students to read some source material or a passage and then respond to questions that match with it. And it's that focus on content area reading that is so important across all of our grade levels, and why these efforts in elementary school are so important, so that working with a complex passage in science or social studies is not challenging for any student simply because the reading might be a barrier. That is a visualization of our secondary interim assessments. So I'll just end with some things that we're learning, and then gladly handle any questions that you might have. Coming back to this theme of technology contributing to our efficiency. This is not a stack of things that take sizable amounts of time in the classroom. These are things that as our staff builds more fluency with them and students build more fluency with them, we can get these snapshots in a fairly quick amount of time so that the teachers can be spending their time where they need to, and that is planning from what they learn. This may seem like a random thing, but it says our elementary classrooms are busy places. They always have been busy places, but of our commitment to inclusive classrooms, we're making sure that the adults who are involved in supporting our students are more present with our students when they're all learning together, rather than pulling them out in groups where they might be missing that really important core instruction. So we are learning that our elementary classrooms are busy places, and we have to navigate that, and we have to understand and support that, and we have to get more clever around how the adults use time to get in and not necessarily be right on top of each other in spaces that are meant for much smaller people. Our assessment items continue to improve by way of predictability, and again, going to our nationally normed item banks and our jury process over the summer, where our teachers are investing a considerable amount of time to make sure these assessments are getting them the information that they need. Continuing to work on data and assessment literacy, helping answer the question like, why would I give this? What does this give me of any value? Why is this worth the time? Focusing heavily on our school leaders so that they can lead conversations in their building around the trends that I shared with you that are at a district level. And this is just a celebration of our teachers right now. I don't know that I can think of a time in my career where there has been so much for the adults to learn at exactly the same time that the stakes are so high for kids to learn. So much is happening at once, and our adults are learning new technology platforms. They're learning new curriculum. They're learning and experimenting with different approaches to get to the equitable outcomes that are so important. They're doing all that while they're showing up in their classrooms every day and being phenomenal with our kids. And everything that you see here is really a celebration of them and their commitment to what we know we can deliver for our students.
David, you talked about the structure, and I just wanted to know, there's been a lot of talk before about the structure of the district and how we've made some changes within it. Do you see the organizational structure allowing us to respond and support our staff and our students quicker now, or what type of changes have you seen kind of tied in with the assessment part, but also the ability for response to happen throughout the district on that?
I appreciate that question. As we've talked about organizational changes and improvements over the last year, a lot was mentioned about kind of groups existing in silos. When I talk about our busy elementary classrooms, it's because there isn't just one department or one team or one director who owns this notion of inclusive classrooms. This is a shared commitment that I feel now more than ever, lots of professionals are able to bring their skill sets to. The learning that comes along with that is our classrooms are happening in real time. And so while we have more district leaders focused on and invested in this, we've got to do it in a way that is received and felt in the classrooms as being supportive and not this rush and flood of support. Everybody wants change to happen now, but our classrooms happen in real time and our leaders need to continue to navigate working together. But I'm very positive about the spirit of togetherness that our district leaders are participating in to be able to bring these kind of changes to the field.
And do you see there's a lot of professional development that goes into this, especially, you know, I hear about it from teachers that I know and the work on that. These assessments are quick and the data that you get from them is, like you said, is real time in there. Do you feel that there's a good sense of collaboration between all the groups that are involved in it, whether it's the educators and our staff there, as well as different leadership groups on making sure that we're using this in the best method? So our kids are closing that achievement gap, but also learning what they need to, and that we're giving the tools to the teachers to do that, but also not having this as a canned thing, like that teachers are still able to use the art of teaching while they're in the classroom to deliver this information.
Yeah, I think that's the key to our students finding joy in learning, is that their teachers are showing up very human to this work. It is a program that requires a lot of upfront learning and focus. Like almost anything that you come to learn to do well, you start doing it by following a model, and then you start to make it yours, whether it's a golf swing or playing a musical instrument. And so these would be the moments where we're really asking our staff to focus on what the high quality materials lay out in terms of being aligned with the research behind how we know kids learn to read. And there's a day that goes by that doesn't allow them to be expansive on that. But yeah, absolutely, on the front end of an adoption, there would be a tighter connection to the materials and the resource.
David, a couple of years ago, before your time, the board had created a task force to look at these assessments and the volume of assessments. And given the amount of efficiency that the current technology and our platforms have enabled, couple direct questions. One, has your current initiatives around gathering this assessment intersected or been constrained in any way by any of the mandates that were established a couple of years ago around reducing assessments? And if so, is there any thought to kind of revisiting those conversations because of the change in platform and the change of the lack of teacher time and involvement in grading the assessments and preparing for the assessments?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think what I've become more tuned into in regards to prior conversations about assessment and the volume of assessment is really being a watchdog for that efficiency component. Because I will say to you now, and I've always said this, the most effective assessments are the ones that are created by teachers based on the students that they know and spend their days with. And so anything that can free up time for them to be able to engage in conversations with colleagues that teach the same grade to kids across the hall so that they can be creating the absolute best in the moment. Like today's goal was to do this. How many kids were able to and how many kids weren't? That's a teacher created assessment to answer. And so I'm vigilant about making sure as much time as possible is available for them to create and to provide models if requested, but our teachers are pros. They know how to do these things. So all of these other things that help give us more of a system look into the progress of our students have to be as efficient as possible. So I'm not feeling constrained other than just being mindful of anything that sounds like it's new or added absolutely has to put more time back in our teachers' hands to create the assessments that are most impactful.
Rick?
So David, a couple slides earlier, you talked about the data from the Black kids was taken out, extrapolated. Could you elaborate on that again? Just what you did with that data and why?
This is, these are results from the first interim assessment of 6th, 7th, and 8th grade science that have two comparison groups. So the group that's listed on the top above each bar is the profile for all students. And then the one below it is for, so it says physical science 6 all, and then it says fall 2024. And then right below it says physical science 6 Black African American fall 2024. So this is a filtering ability that we have for any of our interim assessments. And because we've created district goals that have identified groups that we have served the least, we want to make sure that we are working with our data similarly. So this is really showcasing a way in which we're able to work with the data so that if we say that we're going to close a gap, that we can look at that across any different grade level, any different subject area. Yeah. Yep.
Anyone else have any questions?
Mr. Johns, your presentation, it's pretty interesting, exciting to me because I always believe in technology that could improve and gets us to the efficiency rate that we needed to be as a district. But you know, I think you alluded to the idea that the news somehow, the media somehow got a hold of our district numbers. And I think that, you know, just kind of going around, you know, talking to different people, different groups, many of the parents, they don't really see or understand some of the things that we do as a district and to get participation, to get engagement, to improve our scores or to improve our efficiency or at the bottom line, I feel as though that we are a district, we are a school district, our bottom line, excuse me, should be largely making sure that every kid is proficient. And I appreciate that you're trying to do that. I think district has a lot of things that we try to do to get there. But I like to hear more about how we as a district going to engage the different dynamics that exist in our districts, you know, the different communities to see where we could connect the dot from the school to the parents, and so that we could actually come together and educate or at least produce the results or the products that we ultimately want it to be, which is 40, 50, or 60% proficiency rate for our kids, for our students here in GB. I'd like for you to talk a little bit about on the other side, how we're going to achieve that.
Thank you for that question. And I want to be clear when I shared the initial release of DPI data, that was data that was available to the media to work with and communicate however they wanted to. A couple things immediately to mind, and the short answer to your question is we're going to need a lot of help to do just the thing you said. The short answer that comes to mind as it relates to some of the performance snapshots that I'm sharing is that both Canvas through Mastery Connect as well as Lexia have student reports and parent reports that either are translated or are translatable with a third party plugin that we might use. And again, that's simply a reporting measure, but it wouldn't be fair for me to say that we're looking at progress and in many cases celebrating progress and also not giving families an opportunity to share in the progress that their children are making. And so these programs also allow us to make that kind of home and family communication as well. Something that's being discussed that I think is going to be really important as it relates to this literacy adoption and program is more topical communication with families around what is it our students are learning and focusing on through the ELA program. There's a lot of high interest, developmentally appropriate things that get kids excited that are really at the core of this program. And to help parents have more conversations with their students about their experience in school, I believe we need to kind of seed those conversations with here's some questions you might ask, here are some things that we're focusing on right now, in order to generate that interest and just get kids talking about school. We've all tried really hard. If you've had children to have a sustained conversation about what happened at school, I believe we could provide some more tools to help with conversations like that. I think celebrations are very important. I think our ability to, from time to time in our schools, recognize progress. Some of the schools that piloted Lexia last year were doing assemblies around it. Kids get certificates and badges based on their progress. Lots of things to be really proud of that ought to come back home for conversation and discussion as well.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
David, I visited Washington. I visited some of the other schools that are more concentrated, heavily concentrated in minority kids. And the thought process and what the teachers and the principals are doing, I want to commend them for giving such an effort. But I feel that there is a need for leadership to step in and to be more involved in how we're gonna communicate these information, these wonderful information to the families and the communities that we have in here. For example, one of the principals mentioned to me that when she put together events that are more geared towards relationship building, more towards celebration of some sort, lots of family actually participated. But when the idea of we're going to talk about academic, we're gonna share some of this information with you, the lack of attendance decreased dramatically. And my thought process, if we as leaders of this district, we could put more thoughts, more creativity, more innovation in that particular area, I think that we could bridge the gap. Because honestly, if I'm a kid, I'm a student, and I know that the school is serious about my education, but on the other hand, I know my parents are super serious about my education, I think I have no choice but to actually become a better student. And I think that's where I would challenge us as leaders of the district to be more innovative, to come up with a solution that where we could gap the difference. Because even myself, I think all of this technology confuses me a little bit too when I try to see how my kids is doing. Or yet I have 6 teachers or classrooms sending emails to me on a daily basis. That's kind of confusing to me a little bit too.
I think one of the things that we look at, and the time that I've been on the board where we've worked on making sure we're right sizing our schools, looking at different models to deliver education, but also making sure that that connection is made for our students is going to be the biggest step that helps our student success. And looking at it on a case by case basis, when you look at individual buildings, like you had mentioned, the connections that as a board we've supported, including positions of people that are sometimes here and is not here right now, but staff members making those family connections, making sure that we have the resources available for our students in the building. And then with our next two speakers, also showing the different opportunities that we have to meet students where they're at, whether it's through programs at East that make sure that we have resources available for them, or that we have John Dewey and we have NEW School of Innovation. So we're meeting our students at different levels, I think is making progress towards that. We look at the possibility with a referendum with a K-8 school being built on the west side, where we're able to consolidate those resources for the students at the building and make sure that they're able to be more likely to be able to attend the school, just because the geographic footprint's a little bit bigger helps out as well. I agree. I think as a board, we have done a strong job with it, and there's always areas to improve of making sure those resources are available for school. The other thing is making sure that we have staff in those buildings that are making connections with students. And I'm looking at a student from East High School, and I bet you I could ask her 3 staff members who've made connections with her and made school feel like it's an important spot for them to be at. And I'm going to guess at Preble, and I could probably think of the teachers' names off the top of my head who I know have reached out to make sure those connections are there, to have those kids in the building, because attendance is obviously the number one priority, making sure those basic needs are being met. And that's how we continue to build on the education part of it. So I appreciate the question as well. I think we've done it. We've got to look into it, but obviously there's areas that we need to continue to improve on and make sure that our students are feeling welcome and that we are able to keep them in the building someplace and make sure that those programs are set up so if they move from one school to another, they still have that connection in some capacity with it. So thank you.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate your points there, and I think truthfully, the district itself, we are. I mean, I could compare us to a family or a person who dressed really well, because we have the resource to do it. We have the different types of programs. But what I'm trying to say is that we have been in this position for so many years. And this should be considered crisis management right now for us, because the goal is to produce that product, that perfect product. I know perfect is such a, we can't get perfect, but we can strive to get there. And what I'm saying is that a school, our purpose is to educate, and educate has a product. And the product is, yes, we do a lot of wonderful things. We build a lot of wonderful relationships, but results, it's what drives. And so the idea is that we have to have this sense of urgency that we have to tackle this proficiency issues that we have. And it has been like that for many years now. And that's what I'm trying to allude to, that, yeah, I do agree. We have wonderful programs. We have wonderful leadership at the school level, but we need to be a little bit more innovative. How are we going to improve this proficiency rate for our kids? Because if we actually compare, what the other schools are doing, we're not even in the top half. We're like the bottom half, and even at bottom quarter in the state. And that's what I'm saying, that this is a crisis. We have to really put our thoughts together and solve this issue. And I don't disagree that we have a lot of wonderful things in our district. That's why I always say that we have the resource and foundation to actually make our school that successful.
Any other questions for David on this? No. David, are you staying up for the next part, or?
I am, but I'm scooting over.
We could have our charter school update members come up. Looks like Dan Slowey's coming up, Jason Johnson, and Jenny Wassenberg. As a personal note, I'm glad to see Jenny here. I used to work with her in a different district, so I'm glad that Green Bay was able to and get her in a leadership spot for us. So, Dan.
Thanks, Brian. I appreciate it. And thank you for having us here this evening. Once again, I agree with you. It's great to have Jenny up here with us. Jenny Wassenberg's the new principal at JDAL. And then we have Jason Johnson as well, the principal at NEW. And I'm really happy to be sitting here before you with themselves and David Johns as we discuss our charter schools and kind of lay out a timeline of what you can expect as leaders. I appreciate being here with them because I've got to know both of them and they're very passionate about their schools, but more importantly, passionate about the students that walk through those doors every day. Equitable instruction. So the conversation we just had, we could meet the needs of all. So I appreciate them being here tonight as well. We did share a timeline that we want that, and Renee Every, I also would like to thank her. She could not be here today. She's been supporting the charter schools as well as we work through this timeline. She's back in an emeritus position, so I wanted to thank her as well for the support on this. You'll notice the timeline. It really just kind of frames up basically the next year and a half together and the direction we will be going and making sure we have everything before you that you need to make informed decisions to support the charter schools and as we go through this process. If you notice the timeline that is here in this memo, we start in May of 2024 is when we kind of started this process of this next, you'll notice that there was a timeline miss because of some shifts in leadership. We have updated that and got that to the point where we should be with our contract. And that information was discussed with Jenny, along with myself and Renee on September 24th, 2024. And her team has been working together with Renee and myself of getting that information together for the authorizer report. On October 10th, her school at JDL, her governance board, received the authorization report for review. And then that will be coming to you next week. I believe Kinsey already has access to that. I'm sorry, not next week, but in 2 weeks on the October 28th. You'll notice that I won't go through line for line with what's on here, but I'll allow them to answer any questions you may have. But this will end in, not end, but this timeline takes us all the way to January of 2026, where the school board will need to vote no later than 5 months prior to the expiration of John Dewey's agreement to make sure if that is to continue as a charter school. Okay. Any questions regarding the timeline, charter schools, or anything that we'd like to add? And
I'll just add for the board members that have been here, this is our standard practice for our charters.
And just for clarification for anyone watching at home, or if any of our newer board members have any questions on it, could you briefly describe what's unique about each of your schools or both of your schools, and also why are we looking at the charter approach within continuing with the charter approach as opposed to just a traditional setting with it briefly?
All right. So at NEW School Innovation, we are housed at NWTC College, which is very unique in itself. There's only 2 or 3 schools in the entire state that are housed at a college. Intentionally, we look to recruit for students who have not found their success or their home in a traditional school for whatever reason. And we use our method of personalized learning to re-engage them in school and provide them opportunities. Starting in 7th grade, all of our students have access to a college class taught by a college teacher or an associate professor. Starting in 10th grade, they can then jump from that experience to start taking dual credit classes. They're one of the few students in the state that as 10th graders can take a college class. Our goal is that by their senior year, they've completed their academics and they're really immersing themselves in the college experience. We started to see a big increase in that over the last couple of years. What we tell our students is take every opportunity you can. Find out what you don't like. That's just as valuable as finding out what you do like. So for us, it's a very personalized approach. We're proficiency based, so it's a show me school. You can't just, oh, I did the work. It doesn't matter. It has to be done to a very high level. They have to be proficient in all 95 standards to graduate from NEW.
And just to follow up with the graduation, then Jenny, if you can share with us as well. I mentioned this before, the graduation ceremony for NEW School of Innovation was probably the biggest, if not the second largest, of the graduation ceremonies this year. It seemed like just as far as family members there and excitement and stuff. So that's a excellent indication of what's going on and how successful it's being. So Jenny, go ahead.
So John Dewey Academy of Learning is a project-based charter school for 6th through 12th grade students. When we say project-based, we mean that they are doing and meeting the learning targets through creating projects that they have interest in. Our staff also develop seminars that are project-based that students will meet their learning targets within that. When I say learning targets, we are a school that students are in charge of their learning targets. So at the start of a project, they are breaking down the learning targets that they are meeting into pieces. They're defining vocabulary that they might not understand, and they're making sure that their projects meet that. We ask that students create products to show evidence of their learning, and that they are also teaching students when they are doing assessments about those concepts that they have learned about. We really try to tell students that the learning doesn't just happen within our four walls. We do everything we can to get our students outside of our building and learning for experts in the field, or mentors in the field, as well as one of our classes, our personal financial literacy. We bring lots of experts in from the outside to help teach and to help guide our students through that project process. And our students this year are pretty excited because they get to determine what they need to do to become a millionaire in our personal financial literacy class. So that is their product that they need to create along with help from our outside experts. What our students have to do for graduation, we do encourage them to continue to do college classes also, but they are required to do a capstone project their senior year. That capstone project encompasses the whole entire year. They're asked to find mentors within areas of interest that they have, as well as still continuing to meet the proficiency within those learning targets. Many students will come to a point where they research maybe a career choice and they come to the conclusion they don't necessarily want to go into that career after doing the research. But we do stress that we want them to make sure that they are including and giving back to the community through community service within those projects also. So again, it's a whole year project that encompasses where they're coming. So they learn the project process as they come to us. And by the time that they're capstone, they should be able to teach the project process and share with the community within our event nights. They do have a capstone presentation night where they are presenting their projects for about an hour. It's 25 minutes of presentation, and then they have community involvement within their presentations, and then they have opportunity for questions. So we kind of compare our capstone project to that of writing a thesis for college and helping them to prepare for that in all aspects of that.
Any other questions? Rick?
Just some personal observation. I've been visited both of your schools and actually had a chance to participate with one of the classes. We talked about the Cold War. I am big fan of both the approaches, the unique approach to learning, the immersion that the students displayed. It was genuine. And I always ask, what can we do, the board, to help make things better, easier, less challenging as they do these unique things? And I would say be open to unique requests for these particular schools that may be outside of the way we normally deal with schools, transportation being one of them. I know that in Jenny's school, a lot of the projects are away from the building, out and about, and some sort of dedicated shuttle run or some sort of transportation that gets these kids to these locations and back to the school building in a safe, secure manner would be something out of the ordinary, but something that we as a board should look at and should consider resourcing. Same thing with your kids just getting to the school. They have to find their own transportation to get there. Figure out ways that we could accommodate that in a way that, you know, doesn't break the bank, but still makes this particular experience less challenging. So, yes, sir.
I'll say one of the unique things about Green Bay is they have provided us transportation to get the kids as we moved out to NWTC. So we have a hub busing system. It's not as expansive as we want, but it is fiscally responsible. So we do have 40 to 50 kids that are riding that transportation every day. So, anywhere between 30 and 40% of the school is using public transportation. And as a charter school, it's not required, but we're very grateful that we do have it though.
And I think, Rick, one of the things that transportation always seems to come back is something that we need to figure out a solution for. And I know that for the 3 years I've been on the board, we've talked about it for our charter schools, our schools in general, our traditional schools, our students being able to participate in athletics and activities, making sure that if there is a united team that I'll use swim as an example that meets at Southwest and you have a ton of kids from Preble getting there, how do we get more kids involved in that and line up that transportation for them? We have a significant number of United teams. We have activities and athletics, and we have classes being offered at different spots of how can we do that? James and I came up with some ideas 2 years ago, but we still got to build on that whole let's change Green Bay Metro Transit. So James, we got I don't know how much time. So go ahead, Ku.
Thank you. Jenny, I haven't been to your school yet, but I do plan to stop by sometime in the future here. But I have visited Northeast Wisconsin Innovation, and one of the things that I realize is that, as I stated before, I think the district has provided the opportunities for different kids in different situations to succeed, and this is one of the good examples that we have. And I want to commend you all for doing such a wonderful job and keep going at it. And yes, I do agree with Mr. Crossan, Mr. Meltz, and Mr. Lively that if there's anything that we could do to help you, to make your job easier and to help these young kids succeed, please let us know. Thank you.
Can I just say something quick? I have to say that you coming into our building, the students were very appreciative of that because I think that they want to be heard. They want people to know that we exist. And I'm not sure everybody always knows John Dewey or NEW or what we do in those buildings. So I thank you very much for doing that. They were very appreciative, and those students came back after you left and said that was really cool. Is anybody else coming to visit us? So please come check us out.
I think the other key part of that is that recognizing that students, we expect success out of them at all of our schools, and to not think that this is a warehousing or that we're setting you here because we're not expecting you to be successful. It's just those different opportunities to be successful. And I think partnerships that we've had with the community when we've looked at different schools to set up to meet our students where they are, we need to advertise that fact. And I know as board members, Rick has been out there. I've been out several times. Who's going to be there? And I'm sure that Lynn has been to every building in the district, I think, so far. So it's important for our friends in the media to look at these opportunities when we have these showcases to demonstrate the great things that we have going on in our district and the different opportunities we have to meet there. And those showcases are open to the public, correct? And I'm sure, Jason, you have programs that are shared and other buildings that community support is necessary throughout all of our buildings, but especially in those non-traditional ones, to let the kids see we buy in what you're doing and you're doing a great job with it. So thank you. Laura?
I have two parts. First, Jason, can you explain? So I follow you on Facebook. I follow your school on Facebook. Explain to people what ringing the bell is.
So at our school, it's tradition that when a student completes their academic components, and this is primarily our students in the academy, or recently we've had some 13th graders that returned with some success. So we have a 4x8 board that they get to sign with all their friends and family around, and then we bring them all to the front of the school, and we have an old school bell. And when they ring that bell, and there's a lot of cheering, a lot of hugging, a lot of crying, and it's a really great moment. So every kid who completes our program gets an opportunity for that. For our younger students, these are usually later in the year, we line them up. They got family members there too, and they each take their turn to ring the bell and sign the board. It's a big deal for us.
So I noticed recently, there's been quite a few kids, so it always makes me happy when I see those Facebook posts that's happening. I know the kids are reaching their goals. And then the second thing is, Jenny, when your kids figure out how to be a millionaire, can you let us know?
I'm gonna have them teach me first.
Okay.
And then I'll let you.
Any other questions? Thank you so much for what you're doing for our students and making sure we're meeting them where we can, and any support we can provide, please let us know. But you're doing a fantastic job, so thank you.
Thank you very much.
And that is all I have for education.
Okay.
We have, sorry, Lynn.
We're
We
gonna
have.
move on then to operations. Thanks, Dan. And that will be, I'm not sure, is it you, Rick, or who? No, Rick? All right. All right.
Okay. All right, we're gonna start in operations with going over the proposed budget. Our CFO, Angie.
Good evening, everybody. So we actually have two separate presentations. This is the first. So we thought that we would I would take an opportunity to do a little overview of how public school funding in Wisconsin. Yeah, that's me. Wow. Big picture. So I think it's the right time just to kind of for your benefit. We have some slides included in here that were provided to us from WASBO, which is the Wisconsin Association of School Board, not school board, sorry, Business Manager Association. And so you'll see some of those slides. So we're just going to do an overview of some highlights of just in general, Wisconsin. There we go. Okay, so to go through a few key points related to how school districts are funded in Wisconsin, we'll highlight some of the challenges that all school districts are facing, including Green Bay, and then we'll kind of talk in detail about a few of these bullet points. The first one, of course, is the cost of living inflation. We've all been affected by that in our personal lives and with budget. So the rising cost of everything and the funding not keeping up from the state has been a challenge for school districts, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. A couple of these other bullet points, just recognizing that there are state and federal mandates that we have to fund, and whether we have adequate funding or not from the state. We'll talk a little bit about private school and independent charter vouchers. Declining enrollment. We are still continuing to face declining enrollment among many other schools within the nation and in Wisconsin. And then just another factor that impacts our budget is our aging facilities. So first, let's talk about special education. So school districts must now absorb the rising cost of student needs, especially those related to the pandemic. Although school districts are mandated by federal and state law to meet the needs of students with disabilities, the funding has not come close to covering these expenditures over the course of the last several years. So our Fund 27 related to Green Bay, we have a $58 million special education budget. Of that, we received last year 32.4% of reimbursement from the state on aidable expenditures. What that equates to is about $15 million. So then you ask, well, how do you cover that $58 million if you're only receiving, right, less than a third from state reimbursement? A large part of the funding that comes into special education or Fund 27 is coming from the operating fund, Fund 10. So this year in 24-25 budget, we have $35 million budgeted to transfer from the operating budget into Fund 27. So one of the big asks to the state legislature this year for the upcoming state biennium budget is to increase that reimbursement rate from 32.4% to about 60%. So if you equate that to what we would receive as a district, that would double that revenue coming in from the state. So we would receive about an additional $15 million more, which would then in turn reduce that Fund 10 transfer which would put less pressure on Fund 10 to spend money on special education. So regardless of how many students or how much this increases, right, the rising costs everywhere, right, affects Fund 10 and Fund 27. So that is one of the big asks that's coming through the state budget in the next couple of years.
Angie, we're reimbursed we were last year at 32.4%. What are private schools reimbursed at?
They get 90%. Brian?
Brian? And just for clarification, when you look at special education students and the needs, there's a big umbrella of that. So that 90% is based off of just a general formula, I would assume. So if you have a student that's receiving services do you know if they're billed in certain ways, or is it just a general fund that they look at the reimbursement for? I don't know if I'm being clear on my question. We look at 30% of the reimbursement costs as a big pool of what our special education costs are, correct? And I would assume that if you're looking at a voucher school, they also are looking at it as a big pool of what their special education costs are. Would I be correct on that? I'm trying not to put you in a spot here because you're kind of looking at me like I'm not being very clear on that.
I think he's talking about the difference between sub-sufficient.
Sure. So some certain or some sufficient. So currently we are reimbursed some certain, which means that there's a pot of money, and that's right. It's a set amount. And so as the rising expenditures across school districts across Wisconsin, we're all pulling from that same pot. If they say that they're going to get, or you're going to get reimbursed 33%, at the end of the day, we got 32.4% because, right, there's just a set amount of money. Another ask at the state legislature for the next state biennium budget will be that is a sum sufficient, meaning that you get whatever your needs are, you get what that is, regardless of what the percentage is.
Yes, Lynn.
Would it be simple to explain why voucher schools get reimbursed at 90% and our school gets reimbursed at 32.4%, or is that too big a question?
That's a fantastic question that I don't know we have the answer to.
I think it's political, and I think you'd have to talk to the legislatures that over the years have set up those systems that cause the 90% funding in the private schools and the 32% here, which doesn't even meet the law they wrote for themselves.
Just something that came up, and I know that this question is going to be answered next month when we talk about special education. The number of special ed students is increasing. And one question that I would love to have answered is, why is that happening? And what are the causes, and what's the reality of that increase? Because that definitely impacts the cost. And I know that's not a question for you to answer, but that's something that we have to understand.
In your presentation, you said that it was going to be an ask to increase this reimbursement amount. Is that just a general statement, or have our advocacy groups who kind of help shape the ask kind of landed on this being primary?
Yeah, exactly it. So the main groups have all kind of come to consensus, like these are going to be, these are going to be the top priorities for the next budget. Okay, so let's move on. Maybe. Oh. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about school vouchers. So Wisconsin ranks third in the nation on share of state education dollars on private K-12 options. So in Wisconsin, a private school voucher is a state-funded payment that allows eligible students to attend private schools instead of public schools. So to be eligible for a voucher, there are certain income and some requirements that you need to qualify to receive a voucher. School districts levy for the cost of the vouchers, and this funding is deducted from the state aid that would otherwise go to the district. So we've talked about this several times at the table. I just think it's a nice reminder, and I think this is a really good picture of where Wisconsin is as far as taking that state education dollars and putting it into private options.
Right.
So just for clarification, that's referred to as first pull on it, correct? Where we're looking at the set amount and then we have a certain amount allocated to us and the vouchers are paid off before we look at other options on that. Am I correct on that?
Talking about how we levy for them? Yes. So, so the state aid is deducted and we have to levy back to kind of backfill the state aid that we're not receiving.
Yeah, Lynn. Oh, Laura?
So to be absolutely clear, we have to levy for that amount, which is basically the taxpayers of this community pay for those.
That is correct.
Thank you.
So that's a good segue into the next slide. So this is what we have levied since 2016-17. So you can see, that has significantly increased. You see a large jump between 22-23 and 23-24, and we've talked about that a little bit, and I'll discuss it a little bit later in the presentation. But that large jump wasn't because we had a large number of kids receiving a voucher that hadn't had one before. The large increase is due to the large amount that it increased per voucher for the private schools and the independent charter schools. And I've got a graph on that a little later on in the presentation. So in 24-25, that 12.9 million is what we have budgeted, but of course we won't get that final number until tomorrow. October 15th is a significant date for school districts. So we'll be able to finalize tomorrow. So this is just based on estimates. So I'll follow up with you in a couple of weeks on that final number.
So Angie, how many kids are receiving voucher money in the district now?
So last year we had about 1,100 kids receiving a voucher, and we have never made it to the cap. So there are, it has been capped every year at 1%. So we've never maxed out at that cap.
Lynn?
You did say, I'm sorry, was it like 2 slides back? You said something about there are parameters, there are requirements. Not everyone who applies for a voucher can have one because like the income level, but that's going to go away soon. Isn't that true? That income level cap?
I'm not sure about that, Lynn, but I could get back to you on that. Okay, so moving on to declining enrollment. So, so this slide is just kind of showing you that, of course, like we've talked about, declining enrollment is another major challenge that school districts are facing. This map shows a time progression where districts grow darker and as enrollment declines and lighter as enrollment increases. So it starts back in 2006-07, so you can kind of see now it's starting over. As we move through, we're getting darker because that enrollment change, those are where all of the districts, most of the districts are experiencing declining enrollment. 71% of districts are in declining enrollment. And what really hit me on this WASBO slide was public school enrollment projected to decline by over 10,000 students annually over the next 5 years. That number's pretty staggering. So basically this next, so this next graph, this is just showing that we're trending with the births, right? So the births are running from 2000 to 2022, and we can see that decline, 17% decline since the peak in 2007. So, the enrollment in schools and public schools is also declining. So it's just following that trend. And then here's public school enrollment. There are a couple dates at the bottom that are highlighted, that 12-13, that's when, I believe that's when vouchers were put into place. Let me double check my notes. Yes, so 12-13 is when statewide vouchers came into play. And then 1920 and 2021 is was the pandemic. And we'll cover this next slide in the budget update in a little bit, but this is the Green Bay student enrollment. So as we have projected, that membership FTE has declined to 19,416. So since 16-17, we're seeing that decline, and we continue to project that we will continue to see declining enrollment in the future. So why is that important? So the revenue limit is really the backbone of school finance in Wisconsin. So the vast majority of revenues that are coming into our district and any Wisconsin district is based off of this. The revenue limit acts as a cap per student that school districts can spend each year. So a big part of calculating what the revenue limit is each year is the number of students. So as we decline in enrollment, that's why it's important, because that means in a few years, like after that rolling average, we are declining in revenue as well as a district. So the other important thing here is revenue limit. So based off of, basically the big driver is our enrollment, but then you subtract out general aid and that equals property taxes. So that's an inverse relationship. Property taxes plus state aid equals the revenue limit. So when you add to one, it decreases the other. So if we add a whole bunch to the equalized aid, so when you hear, oh, the state added all of this money to state aid, that doesn't mean that we're getting more money in the classroom. All that is doing is it's property tax relief, because it's an inverse relationship.
Question, Angie, about how is funding for multilingual learners?
Good question, Rick. We get reimbursed 8% of our ML students. Yeah, we get reimbursed 8% for our ML program.
Lynn?
Can you clarify, what do you mean 8%? You get reimbursed 8% of the cost of educating them? Thank you.
Brian?
And this question might be for Vicky. Offhand, do you know how many different languages our students speak coming into our district?
We have close to 40 different languages. We've got about 4,000 students that are in the multilingual language program.
Laura?
I don't know if you can answer this, and it might be similar to what Andrew said before, but do we know why it's so shockingly low? The reimbursement rate?
No, that's same as Andrew's answer, is that's the state legislature.
Thank you.
Okay, so a little bit of history on revenue limits. So prior to the revenue limit, they were enacted in 1993-94, but prior to that, basically what would happen is the state would determine how much school districts would get in aid, and then the local boards would figure out what the needs were for that school district, and then they were able to set their levies. So the revenue limits were enacted in 93-94, so it basically put a cap on the amount of money per pupil that school districts could spend in state general school aids and local property taxes combined. So what happened though is at that time, if you were a conservative or a low spending district like Green Bay was at the time, you got locked into a lower revenue per pupil. So that's why it has been such, like when we saw the low revenue ceiling increase last year from 10,000 to 11,000, we benefited from that because we've been locked into that low amount, and it's different for every single district. So if you spent more at the time that these revenue caps were put into place, that's where you got locked in and you had a higher amount to spend per pupil. So I guess in a nutshell, it really doesn't matter, what your needs are as a district, right? You have a lot of ML students, you have, different types of students. It doesn't matter. You're locked into that low revenue limit. And that's right. That's how much you have to spend per pupil. Laura?
just to compare, I think there's a school district up in Door County
Mhm.
that is like at 18,000 because that's what they were spending at the time that number was locked in.
Yeah, so the highest, now this is last year's numbers, keep in mind, but the highest spending district in Wisconsin received $26,356 per pupil. And we were at 11,000 last year.
And all because of this decision that was made back
30
all
years
those
ago.
years ago.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Brian?
Do you mind sharing what that district is? And we could look to see what the percentage of different students they have. Do you know offhand, or we can?
Yeah, I'm not sure which district. I could take a stab at it, but I don't want to be incorrect.
Lynn?
Do you know where we fall compared with all of the Wisconsin districts in that level?
The average is around 11,500. Does that sound about right? No, I mean, we are the lowest, but district-wide, there are essentially, I think the average is around that 11,500 mark.
So it sounds like there was a de facto penalty for being efficient way back when that we are still paying for with a totally new set of conditions and a new paradigm. Okay.
So to cope with some of these disparities, that's why we are starting to see so many districts having to go out for operational referendums, because that's really the only tool that school districts have, is to ask the community to support an increase into their revenue limit to address the needs for operations and to get enough money to operate their school districts. So back in 2016-17, as all of us recall, Green Bay did pass an operational referendum in the amount of $16.5 million. It was for 10 years. So after 26-27, that will fall off of our revenue limit. So we've been talking about that openly, that we will be coming back in a couple of years after we have done right and made some of these cost-effective measures to reduce expenditures. Will be coming back to the community to ask to renew an operational referendum.
Laura?
Just to be absolutely clear, again, we don't have a choice.
That is correct. And we'll get into that a little bit here. So another key impact of revenue limits has to do with inflation. When the limits were first adopted in the early 90s, they increased every year at the rate of inflation. But that stopped in 2009-10 with the recession, and it has never come back. Which is super important, because what we're seeing here is that actual line, or the bottom line, is really like the aids that we've received and the per pupil increases that school districts have received. So that, and then the gray line is indexed to CPI. So basically, if we would have received inflationary adjustments on our per pupil amount on the revenue limit, today we would be receiving $3,380 more per pupil, which for Green Bay, that number equates to about $60 million more in operational revenues.
Brian?
Did you say 60 or 60?
60.
And our last budget deficit was 16 million-ish. So doing quick math, that's $44 million difference.
So that would eliminate the need, of course, for operational referendums. Operational. Yep. And capital, right, with that amount of money. So as I talked about before, so this is the voucher charter payments. So I think this is a really good visual to see what happened in 23-24, the change in per pupil payments over the prior year. So last year, when we saw that big jump in the vouchers that we had to levy for from 22-23 to 23-24, this was the reason for it. So when public school districts received 325 per pupil on the revenue limit. So if you weren't a low spending district, you didn't get the 1,000 like we did, you got $325 per pupil, just like we did this year. But voucher K-8 received an increase of 1,494, and then you can see all the way up. So if you recall, right, that voucher increase from 912 for the 3,342 is very close to the slide that we just saw prior for 3,380, right? So that gap, that was an increase in the vouchers for 912 just in 1 year.
Laura?
So the process we're doing right now with all of us elected by our community to care very deeply about children and tax dollars, that is a process that is not often seen in these charter schools where they don't have an elected board and you can't necessarily easily look at their budget. And I just want to point that out because I always like it when you come and talk to us about our budget and money. Like I always learn something. It's always very informative, but everything we do is paid for with tax dollars. And this charter money or these vouchers go to schools where that transparency is just not there. So that's not really a question. It's just an observation. Thank you.
So this is kind of just a recap of where Wisconsin's ranking has fallen relative to the nation on per pupil spending on K-12 education. So back in 2002, we were 11th, so 11% above that national average. And since fast forwarding to 2022, 20 years later, we have now dropped 25th, which is 7.2% below the national average.
Brian?
And while I'm looking at, if you could go back that slide. Sorry. So at the bottom, it mentioned, I recognize that we're an urban school district and that we're looking at Green Bay School District concerns. It's not as if our colleagues and neighbors and friends and community members in the rural district are just rolling in the cash either by some state funding source either. They're even impacted more by it. And just for clarification, Andrew had mentioned it before, that this is the legislator. The legislature can take care of this and find a way. I'm not asking you to respond because I can do it as an elected official. The legislature can take care of this. And if they look at supporting public education, both in a rural and an urban environment and in between, we can adequately fund public schools.
Lynn?
And again, as Brian said, this is not a question, just an observation. I just have to wonder if there is a wish by the Wisconsin State Legislature to fund public schools.
So 3 kinds of referendum ballot questions. So I also think that this is really important for us to understand that there are, 3 types or 2 types and then 2 types of operating and 1 type of capital. So the district will be going for a capital referendum in a couple of weeks. That is to address, that's to borrow debt and to address the needs of our district. When we talk about operating, there are 2 types. There's a non-recurring, which we currently have, which has an end date, which is in a couple years, 26, 27 for Green Bay. And then there's another type of operating question, which is recurring, which will go on forever. So I think it's really important, though, when we talk about both, the capital in a roundabout way, it helps with our deferred maintenance costs, things of that nature, but operating is directly related to the operations of the district. So when we borrow money, that's really for the capital projects, and it doesn't affect how much we're getting in revenues to pay the bills.
Question, Angie, Are there clear lines on your books between operating activity and capital events or
Yes, so when you borrow for capital referendum, we have to separate that in a different fund. So that's our Fund 42, is where all of our capital, like our current capital, so the 92.6, I believe it was. I apologize if I got that wrong. A lot of numbers. 90-ish, that's all being tracked in Fund 42 because we have to make sure that those funds are spent in a limited amount of time. Mhm. Any questions? Because this is the end of this one, and then we're going into another one, right?
Okay, so while Angie's setting up her second portion, which is to present the budget recommendation, I want to point out that there are 421 school districts in the state of Wisconsin, and about 50% of them are going to referendum in this calendar year, 2024. It is becoming the standard practice of addressing deferred maintenance projects and other issues that districts are dealing with in the state.
Laura had her hand up first.
And just to kind of build on that, our district and the people in this community have a history of supporting our schools and supporting our students through these referendums, and I've always been really proud of that. Just wanted to say it.
Brian?
No, we have the PowerPoint up. I just looked and the state budget surplus, does anyone know what it is offhand? I'll just 3.1 billion from what I'm seeing. And this pumps money into local economies. We hire local contractors. We pay staff locally that keeps the money in state. So just be nice to see the state hold up their end of the bargain as far as public financing of public schools. So.
Cool.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. Angie, I think you are so on the money with this presentation. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the Fund 27 with the special ed education?
In regards to,
The costs involved in this particular program to assist some of our most challenged students and their needs, and have the state been able to fulfill their part of the bargain where the reimbursement program for the state and so forth.
yeah, so as we kind of talked about, so that 32.4% is what we received on aidable costs. So we have a budget of $58 million, which essentially is staffing and the contracted services and all of the things that go into to addressing those needs for our students. So we receive about $15 million in revenues for from the state, and then $35 million comes in from Fund 10 as an operating transfer, and then the rest of it is covered through a grant. So those are the revenue sources to cover, essentially almost 90% of our special education fund is staffing, so salaries and benefits, and then contracted services would make up the rest.
James?
While we're educating about the budget, now, is any of our Fund 27 by mandate used to support private school special education activities, which receive 90% reimbursement?
Yes, it is.
Brian?
So just for clarification, special education services would include support staff, would include speech and language pathologists, would include possibly OT and PT in some cases, would include your special education teachers with the different areas of disabilities. That would also include some transportation costs. That would include, would that include medical costs that are absorbed by the district in some areas? that would also include career and readiness when we're looking at our preparing our students to be with the transition services that we've had people come in and speak before earlier this year about programs that they have to make sure that our students are ready to be gainfully employed and contributing members of society when they come out of our school district. And in some cases, that goes up to the age of 21, not just 18. For some of our students, all of that is included in that special education funds, which we get reimbursed at 34% or 32%. Okay.
Laura.
Two specific data points. As I was going through this budget book, I thought I found a line that had the number of what we pay out for vouchers, but I can't find it now. Do you know what page that's on? By any chance?
Yes, and I will review that as well. We are budgeting $12.9 million this year.
Okay, and then I just was wondering where it was on this budget book so I could point, so people could find it, but when I was reviewing it at home, I'm pretty sure I found it and then I forgot to write it down, so.
Yep, it's included on, so on page 18.
Oh, okay.
Payments to state object code 200-387. So it's included in that 14 million number. There are some other things in there like those independent charter schools. That's also included in that number.
Okay.
So yeah, so that number added together, that's the total, but that's where it's included.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And then the other one was, I just think it's important to point this out that when we go out for referendum and we borrow these enormous amounts of money and pay them off very quickly, we save the taxpayers a lot of money in interest. Is there a place in the budget where this, well, actually, I did write that one down on page 29. I think it talks about specifically how much money we're able to save in interest payments.
Yeah, so you can see how much we paid in interest for that bond issuance. Now back in 22, we might have had a little bit left over from the previous referendums. But yeah, we save significantly if you don't have debt for 20 plus years, you save significantly on paying down that debt just like you would with your house.
Yeah.
House
I just think it's important to remind people that when they do entrust us with these referendums, that we make every effort to maximize our return on it.
You bet.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's move into the 24-25 annual presentation. We're here tonight, of course. So in 2 weeks, I will be back and the board will be asked to vote on 2 levies. One with, one without the passage of the referendum like we did a couple years ago. And then I will also be bringing to you some updates. So like I had mentioned before, October 15th is when we will get our final numbers for equalized aid. So in the presentation, it's an estimate. I don't expect it to be radically different, or at least I hope not. But in the past, we get pretty close, within a few $100,000, but then we'll also have our final voucher number. That is one that is a wild card because we don't have any information until the day that we receive those numbers. So I'll bring those updates to the board in a couple of weeks and we'll review those changes in the final budget before we certify. So tonight we'll highlight like the mill rate proposal, student membership. We'll look at property values and what they did this year. And then we'll talk a little bit about our main funds, which are Fund 10, our operating fund, and then Fund 27, special education. Purpose of the meeting. So we're here per Wisconsin statute 65.90. So we hold this public meeting and then the board will vote on that budget in 2 weeks along with vote on and approve the levies. So So specifically to Green Bay, so we talked about some of those factors in the previous presentation. But going into a second year of a state biennium budget is always the easy year, right? Because we know what those revenues are going to be. So next year will be a bit more of a challenge until we know what the state budget is going to look like. But this year, second year, we have a $325 per pupil increase on the revenue limit. Last year, that's when we saw that increase in with $1,000 for the low revenue limit ceiling. And then another thing that I just want to mention is that there is this categorical aid that hangs out there outside of the revenue limit, which is significant for the district. And we receive or are estimated to receive $14.6 million in that aid, which is $742 per pupil. So what we take is we take that 3-year rolling average FTE that we have on the revenue limit. We just multiply that by 742. So that's additional revenue that comes into the district. So as our FTE decreases, you'll see this amount decrease as well over the years. Important. So ESSER funds, right? We've been talking about that for a while. They have ended. So as of September 30th of 2024, anything that was going to be claimed with ESSER or for ESSER needed to be encumbered or spent by September 30th. So we used or set aside or carried over from last year approximately $4.6 million to cover some operational expenditures such as summer school. So we were able to cover summer school with ESSER for one last year. For July and August expenditures, we had some annual renewals for software, some contracted services, et cetera. So this definitely helped us close our deficit this year and close that gap, along with the additional revenue that we received on the revenue limit. And again, declining enrollment. Just like a lot of other districts in the state, we continue to see that declining enrollment, and we'll kind of look at those details later on in the presentation. So our revenue limit formula, again, I try to show this and talk about this all the time, that revenue limit authority minus our equalization aid and others equals our property taxes. So this year, our equalized aid increased significantly by $13.2 million. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. I'm looking at my screen, so. And yes, I could click, well, maybe. Sorry about that. Okay, so revenue limit formula. So there's our revenue limit authority. So that includes our per pupil, our FTE, and then our aid, which equals our property taxes, or what we're estimated to levy. So our estimated equalized aid amount has increased $13.2 million from last year. The reason this is because all of the expenditures that we had in relation to ESSER funding. So if you recall, our equalized aid formula is based on aidable costs or shared costs. So because our costs increased so significantly due to an inflation of ESSER funds into the budget, that's why our equalized aid has gone up so much, which in turn, right, lowers that property taxes or what we're going to levy. So we'll see that in a couple slides when we look at the mill rate. Student enrollment. So we saw this slide in the last presentation, but again, we're projected to continue to decline, and we did see that decrease to 19,416 for our September membership. I mean, really. Okay, property valuation. So in the past couple of years, we have seen a significant increase in property valuation. And again, this year, we saw another on average 7.99% increase. So when we talk about property valuation, I think it's important to remember or to kind of reiterate the fact that when we calculate that mill rate, it's our levy divided by equalized property value times 1,000. So when that property value goes up, that naturally will decrease your mill rate. So when you're looking at, so that means that on average, the taxpayer will see an increase in their fair market value of their property on their property taxes this year, just like we've seen, several years prior. Another thing to just kind of mention is because of the revenue limits and because we're capped, just because our fair market values are going up doesn't mean that we are getting all of that, right? More money into the district. We are getting exactly what we are levying for. It is just being apportioned differently throughout the municipalities that fall within the district. So let's look at mill rate. So this year, the projected mill rate with the passage of the referendum is to be at $7.65. Oh, man. Thanks. Somebody else needs to be doing that for me. So $7.65 with the passage of the referendum. So we have been talking about, right, $8.26. That's what our mill rate was last year. But because of the things that I just talked about, so the increase of the equalized property value, our equalized aid, that has dropped that mill rate naturally to $7.65 from the $8.26 that we've been talking about, which is really significant. It creates a great opportunity for us as a district. So again, this is estimated. We'll get, the final equalized aid tomorrow, the final voucher numbers, which will fluctuate. That will change a little bit, but it's going to be right in that range, which is something to celebrate as far as I'm concerned. So there's some good news, James. Yeah.
Brian?
So just for clarification, with the passage of it, there's an anticipation of lowering our mill rate with the passing of the referendum.
That is correct. Okay, so Fund 10, a little bit about just an overview, a budget summary. So as we talked about, over 82% of our revenues are coming from equalized aid and property taxes. Like I mentioned, we're a balanced budget. We balanced the budget this year, $311.4 million. We've set aside $4.6 million in ESSER. That state equalization aid, we're getting $195.1 million. And again, 82% of our revenues are coming and derived from that revenue limit formula. And then to get into the general fund expenditures a little bit, we talked about that $35 million that's being transferred out to Fund 27. So that's that yellow slice. So 11.27% of our expenditures is supporting our Fund 27 or special education. And contracted services, I always like to talk about this a little bit because sometimes that label can get confusing. So I'd like to just remind people what's actually, what's included in there. So 19.9 million is included in our, for the students who open enroll out of the district. Transportation is included in there, which is 6.6 million. And then the vouchers are also included in there at 12.9 million. And I also want to just note that open enrollment has really stabilized. So the number of students that are going out and the number of students that are coming in really doesn't fluctuate from year to year. So that number stays, the number of students stays steady, but generally we'll see a little bit of an increase on the per pupil for open enrollment.
Laura?
This might be a good time to just remind people that the flow isn't all in one direction. It's not like kids are only just leaving our district. We have a fair amount of kids who also come into our district who choose to take advantage of the opportunities that our district can offer them.
So Fund 27 special education, we really have kind of covered all of this. So the transfer from Fund 10, 35.1 million is budgeted. Our aid reimbursement, that 32.4% we are expecting is about 15.8 million. And then other grants and Medicaid make up the rest of the revenues in Fund 27. And again, just a reminder, I mean, if you look in the budget book and you kind of look in and see kind of the increases, of course, staffing increases, not staffing increases, but just that CPI increase. So that's that accounts for some of the increase in expenditures, but then also contracted services for those positions that are hard to fill, such as visually impaired teachers. That's one that comes to mind that is hard to fill. Speech and language are hard to fill. So we are now contracting with third parties like a CISA to get those individuals in to work with our students because it's hard to fill those positions. So that also is an issue. And then the budget summary. So just to remind everybody that not only do we or are we dealing with Fund 10 and 27, but this is a list of all of our funds. You can find all the detail within the budget book that's posted on page 25. So there's a lot going on, but all in for total expenditures budgeted for the 24-25 is sitting at that $477.6 million. I believe that's the end.
Okay, is any other questions, comments, observations? Yes, James.
So you have two options, pass, fail for the levy in November. A fail referendum will change the mill rate by 35%, right? Oh, about 36%. Can you just speak to the impact or the issue with allowing a mill rate to collapse to $5.30 and what that means for our next attempt to go to referendum?
Sure, I'll take a stab at that. So what we always strategically as a district, we have always kind of set ourselves up so that mill rate stays as steady or as stable as we possibly can. So we have always kind of, as we pay off that debt, we have tried to, right, we get our needs, we know what our needs assessment is, what we need as a district, and then we try to go out, get another capital referendum to kind of fill back that, fill up that bucket of debt. So we don't see all of these peaks and valleys. So we don't want surprises, right? So if you keep it stable, if you keep the mill rate steady, it's not a surprise from year to year. But if it would fail, I think that the key point is that we will continue to do the consolidations, right? They'll look a little bit different, but we still need to address those deficits that we are facing in the future. And then another thing is that when we come back out, right? When we come back out to the district or, to our community, to the taxpayers to ask for an additional referendum, then it's going to be a significant increase in that mill rate, which will then equate to a significant increase in your taxes. So, seeing that drop from $8.26, right, to the $7.65, that doesn't necessarily mean, and I think it's important, right? We can control that mill rate, but that doesn't mean, that your taxes aren't necessarily going to possibly increase because we saw those fair market values increasing by another 8%. But right, to keep that steady, and I think it's really important, right, to invest in our schools because you want people to want to live in Green Bay and to move here for their kids.
Anything else? Okay. Thank you, Angie. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Angie.
All right. The next agenda item in operations is school security drill review. Vicky will speak to that.
Yes, this is the annual review that's required by the state of Wisconsin for the Board of Education to take a look at, and then we would bring it back to the October 28th meeting for final approval by the board.
Any questions, comments? Okay. Next agenda item is the middle and high school activities director job description update. You'd pull that up and open the floor to questions, comments. Andrew?
So I'm still, and maybe it's just a question of a difference of opinion in the end, but I still don't understand why we're singling out a mention of a sports management degree, which I don't think aligns with this job very well, the way a sports management curriculum is taught in the college setting. I am okay with saying or related field, I'm fine with it. I think there could be some other types of fields maybe excel here, but to pick out a degree that isn't probably a match doesn't, I'm not concerned that because that's in there, we're going to pick someone with the wrong skill set. Only that, what does it say when we're posting this, when we're advertising this? For those that haven't watched this meeting and understand that there's more context to it. So, I would probably prefer for it just to say bachelor's degree in education or related field, or even just bachelor's degree as the required, with the master's in education following later as the desired. That's my opinion on it. Otherwise, I do like that it's activities director. I think there's a lot of I see that officials was added, so I like the changes, but I'm not convinced at this point that it's does more good than possibly cause confusion to have sports management singled out as a degree.
Lynn?
Could I please, clarification from Andrew about his question? Or I'd like to know if it said bachelor's degree in education or a related field, period. Would someone who has a bachelor's degree in sports management be able to apply, and could that person be considered? Would that just solve the problem, just take it away? But knowing that if I have a degree in sports management, I can apply and maybe you'll find me appropriate for the job.
Well, I guess my point is I could probably, I think someone who's in sports management could, but I could probably come up with 3 or 4 other common degrees that would be better than sports management to fit here. So picking one that is somewhere probably down the list is the strange part. Yes, you might find this as it's posted if we say sports management in there, but I think the person pursuing the sports management degree because that's their career path probably is not the fit for this job.
Brian?
I think, and Andrew had mentioned this before with it as well, and with the change in the name of the position, I think we also have to look at that we're looking at activities director, which includes music, theater, chess club, all the different opportunities that we provide for our students and our community in there that may have absolutely nothing to do with sports management. That we could be looking at someone that's a theater manager, or that is has done other things that relate with the percentage of our students I'm sure are active in things that do not involve a ball on there. So I'm trying to not add too much to this because I work with a lot of the athletic directors in the area and the activity directors in the area. So I don't want to say as a board member, I would vote against sports management being on there, but looking at what our activities directors do, both at the middle school and the high school level, there is so much more to it than just what's involved with the sports part of it. So
is this the suggestion then, as I'm hearing it, is just to strike that sports management degree qualification in there, just take that out?
It's my suggestion, whether, I may propose it as an amendment.
Okay. Well, with this process, is there not an opportunity, whoever's drafting this document to make the change and then present the final one? That's what we do. Who is authoring this document?
That comes from human resources, and I can work with them to make an adjustment.
Okay. Got it. Anything else with this one? Brian?
Just want to add that there's certain groups that, just as we've heard about other education groups with, we work with the school board association, there's activities and athletic directors associations. The NFHS also offers a lot of training for people looking at these positions, both in the athletics part and the activities part and the music and how to adjudicate speech and debate. And there's a lot of opportunities for our staff members to look into training that would fit this role as well. So I'm a firm believer in, promoting from within and growing our own, that if someone is missing that particular degree, there's opportunities for it out there. So.
Okay, anything else with this particular job description? Okay, we will now move to the next agenda item. That's the superintendent job description update. Any comments, observations, questions? Yes, James.
My first observation is to thank you for, during the last meeting, we asked for model language, and this is above and beyond model language, and, is a kind of a fait complete. And, when we had the conversation at the board table, and the reason why we're postponed was to get clarity around the differences between the job description as it stood and what you had envisioned. I see this as just a really concise version of the much more verbose job description that actually took a good amount of time to ingest and to understand. So this meets all of my criteria for a quality job description that would allow us to identify someone that we think would be successful in the role.
Brian?
Melissa, I have a question for you. When we look at the top, as far as the term of employment, the 24-month position, does that match up with our current practice as far as contracts issued to superintendents? I guess what I'm looking at is with a two-year term, typically I believe we've had 1 year rolling, 1 year rolling. Would that allow us to continue doing that?
Typically, you don't write those sorts of terms into a job description. That's in a contract. By law, you can contract with a administrator for up to 2 years and not exceed 2 years. The rolling contract is allowed. But I have not seen terms of number of years of employment in a job description.
Laura? Oh, I'm sorry, Brian. Excuse me, Brian first.
Thanks, Laura. And Rick. So would it be appropriate to have that in here as a 2-year commitment, the listing of a 24-month position minimum with salary on there, or?
I can answer from a legal perspective, it can be in there. From a enforceability perspective, it means nothing because it's not legally binding. It's your job description. It's not the contract. So I always say don't overpromise and underdeliver. And if you're going to put something in a job description, it probably should have some teeth behind it.
Laura?
That was actually the only thing in this that I was wondering about as well. I would probably be in favor of taking that out, but everything else I'm good with.
Any other questions, observations? I will, I'll speak to that point about 24 months, because in the original one, it was a 1 year. I was speaking, or at least suggesting, the intent of the board that there be some commitment of something greater than 1 year, that may be one area that is causing or leading to turnover. Not, obviously not the only reason, but if we were upfront about what it is that we, the board, was looking for in the way of commitment from the superintendent in this role, then that would then be made clear to anyone looking at this role. That was the intent. And then I did look at what was the legal, limit as far as what you could ask for someone to make a commitment to, knowing that this isn't binding, obviously. Nothing's binding until you sign the contract, but at least it states the intent of the board that, hey, if you're coming here, we want some time commitment and investment because it's going to take time to develop these things as we move forward. So that was the thought behind that. Yes, ma'am.
Just to follow up on that, I agree with you, that it'd be great to, broadcast that out to any applicants that we expect a longer commitment. I'm just not sure, I'm not completely sure that it should be in the job description, so, but we'll have another go at this
Okay.
at our next meeting. People could take a couple of weeks to think on that a little bit.
That's fine.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments? Okay. Then that ends the operations segment. I yield the floor.
I am going to honor a request to take a 5-minute break, and then Kale will be up next. All right, guys, let's get going here.
Is that Dana Carvey?
Title of your file. Super job.
All right. Go ahead.
Did you want her to do the slideshow?
All right, are we ready? All right, go ahead, Kale.
All right, thank you, and sorry for being late. I
It's
apologize.
okay.
See how your cooking skills are.
Oh, great. So I'll just give a brief update on our 22 referendum projects. I broke them up into 3 buckets. Our construction in progress, our design in progress, and then kind of our pre-design services. So the first group are active projects that's, see if it works there. It's not so hard. The first project, the projects that are you've heard of that are active currently still. I did not include any of the completed projects. If we need any information on that, I can certainly speak to any questions you have. But our current projects in progress, we have a dance playground and also a Sullivan playground you see in here that is playground equipment and accessible playground surface. Both of those are scheduled to be done hopefully within this week, but certainly being completed here in October. The second you see here is Lombardi chiller. That's exactly kind of what you see there. It's a replacement of a chiller that has been encumbered and will be installed next spring, summer of 25. The next one is one of the larger projects we have open, and that's the Preble renovation to the Commons and the auditorium. As I said, the last time I gave an update, that completion was pushed to mid to late January. Original completion date was December 20th. That was pushed about 20 working days due to some unforeseen structural changes that needed to take place on that project. So with those changes, new completion date is again that mid to late January date. I have spoken to the principal and that staff and the AD on site. They have made accommodations to accommodate that change date and are currently not concerned with the new completion date. The next is the west renovation in addition. So this includes weight room, locker room, wrestling area, some other miscellaneous areas, and then also the auditorium. The majority of this project is complete. The original turnover date for that was November 22nd. The only piece of this project that will not hit that November date is the auditorium, which I spoke about a little last update. This currently has been pushed into early December. Reason for that, we have a direct contract with a historical restoration company. We have had some challenges with logistics of completing that historic preservation. Nothing that's going to impact the final product, but logistics as we work with the other contractor on site became a little more difficult. So we have worked with the admin staff at West. They're going to move one of their performances that was scheduled to be December 3rd to December 17th. With that move, we hope to make accommodations with our contractors to make sure we can get that turned over in time to not impact that December 17th date. Again, that's in coordination with our contractor who's doing the restoration and the contractor originally signed to do the construction work. The next one, I have the West Stadium. We are near completion with everything on that site, excluding the work with the remainder of the grandstand and the cell tower.
As of Friday, we received occupancy on the restrooms and the concession stands. As you can see, we still have a greenhouse on site that needs to be complete and some additional site work and cleanup.
Go ahead.
I want to know more about what's happening with West and we need more of an explanation about that and who. I'm not saying it's you, I don't think it's us, but there are people not getting the job done there. Seniors who graduated from West and did band all 4 years are now going to be the only kids who never had the band showcase on their home field. Because of that presumably the grandstand issue had a lot to do with it. To say that the West Stadium is basically done except for the grandstand, that's the biggest part of it. Who's not doing what they need to do here? And I don't believe it's us, but who's failing us here?
We halted a poor grandstand, and I would say, a decision that I think I'd be safe to say the district decided on, not by our own choosing, right? So we had the cell tower that everyone was aware of that was causing us not to be able to complete the project as originally designed. That was thought to have been that cell tower was thought to be a process that should have been able to fit within the construction process. As far as relocating that, when we entered negotiations with the city and the city entered negotiations with a third party who owned the cell tower, the realization was that negotiation did not go as planned, I would say. And we had to go back to the drawing board, present numerous options back to the city to go then back to the cell tower company. And eventually we landed on a solution that I think best served everyone. Unfortunately, a lot of time had passed with that. So I would say the delay in that grandstand really was a combination of multiple parties, but us not willing to, I guess, accept the terms that a cell tower company was presenting originally, if that makes sense.
What were they presenting? Something that was financially outrageous?
Yes, financially, they were looking to renegotiate their lease terms with the city, while also putting the cost of relocation on the district. So not only would we have had to pay over $1 million to relocate the tower and the gear, the city would have been asked to have been reimbursed. I believe it was around $1.5 million in lost revenue, pushing that total somewhere in the realm of $2.5 million. As I shared recently, that cost has dropped significantly to the realm of about $250,000.
Oh, go ahead.
So I appreciate that explanation because I don't know that it was widely shared, all of the pieces and parts of that negotiation. However, what's missing is kind of the target date for completion of that.
So we're finalizing terms. Again, this is a little bit out of our control with the city. Just finalizing some language in the lease. So we still don't have that signed yet. Everything's going as planned. We intend to get that executed shortly. But what that caused is, again, a delay in construction as we enter into the winter. We're doing what we can to get the concrete and the structural components underground poured to try to build that grandstand over the winter. Worst case scenario, we're looking at spring of 25 to complete that portion of the grandstand. During this, if there is events or anything we need, we can certainly make accommodations just as we are now for football and soccer. and any other activities that need to take place on that grandstand, as currently constructed, we can certainly do so. And we'll look to limit that impact as we finish the construction of the grandstand. But yes, we're looking potentially at spring of 25 for that completion.
Brian?
I would anticipate that decisions as far as hosting regional events for spring would have already been made by the WIA as far as like eligibility lists. So hopefully we're still able to be considered for the running for those big events that we would hopefully have, whether it's, I believe girls soccer is in the spring, and track and some larger events that would bring in other schools to the area that we weren't able to host before. So.
Yeah, I would have to follow up on when we apply for that with the athletic director. But that was certainly, as we went down this path of sizing that grandstand with the cell tower issue, we want to keep that capacity as high as possible. And that's what certainly hosting those types of events went into consideration. And that's why we were pushing hard to get the originally designed capacity to be maintained. So I can follow up with the athletic director and find out if that impacted anything. I am not aware that it did. Okay. And then finally on here, one of our projects with the city, we are not involved directly with the construction of this, but the safe walk signs that are being installed throughout the city, we contributed funds to the city to have these installed. Originally, the city had noted that they hope to have these installed before the end of the year. You can track it on their website. I have not received a recent update from the city on where they're at. You can see some of the signs are going up, but I have reached out and I'll get an update on that completion date. But the last I had heard from the city was completing yet this year.
So was the delay in those signs, because it feels like that those should have been up and ready for this school year. But my understanding is there was some supply issues for the city was having problems getting the things they needed for them. Am I correct in that?
I would have to get, unfortunately, I wasn't here kind of during that original. I had only heard through, I believe the mayor had mentioned that. I haven't received a direct response from anyone on that, but I did hear that supply chain was the cause of some of those delays.
And just one more thing. Sorry, I had a coughing jag there and I couldn't ask this question. With regard to West, is the greenhouse going to be ready? Because I know like in the spring, the kids plant things and they sell them for like Mother's Day and stuff like that. Will that be ready to go?
Substantial completion is set for, I don't have the exact date here, but it is before Thanksgiving. So that'll be turned over to us middle of November.
Then that should take care of it. Thank you.
Oh, I spoke too soon. Okay. So the next projects may have been some time, maybe since this group has had an update on these. So these are projects remaining from the 22 referendum list that we're working on design with our architects and engineers. So all of these you see here listed have either been designed or are currently being designed and are under contract. These projects then would be intended to be bid out between now and early spring for a construction start as soon as possible. Some of these, as you see here, the Sullivan HVAC, obviously not starting that until the end of school year. But others, such as the ASB edition, potentially could start sooner pending weather and what the contractors want to do. So what you see here is the ASB addition, which is exactly what it sounds like, an addition to our distribution site. Upgrading HVAC, boilers, air handlers, other miscellaneous HVAC equipment at Howe. Currently, we have an HVAC at Jadal that has been designed. Sullivan, similar to the Howe project, upgrading boilers and HVAC systems there. And then the Washington roof, which I had noted was designed and then will be scheduled to be bid out for some favorable pricing with other roof packages and potentially 24 referendum projects to coordinate that work next summer. So all of these you see here are scheduled to begin at some point in winter, spring of 25.
I call on my board members to correct me if I'm wrong, but it was my understanding, first couple of years since 22, the majority of the projects that we opted into, the actual contracting process came before the board. Am I misunderstanding that? But Josh would come up and say, hey, for the particular ball field or whatever, here's who we're contracting with, here's who, and am I just, has there been a change in that position, or has there just not been any contracting over the last 6 months or so when it comes to these referendum questions? Because it stems from the question, because I don't know when you say these are in design with our architects, I don't know who the architect is. And I don't know if I should know who the architect is based on if we're, what the contract was and the cost of the contract. Do you understand?
Yeah, so the majority of these were contracted. Actually, one of them I know was contracted pre-referendum. Actually, I believe two of them were. The Washington roof, for example, is a small enough contract that it goes under our RFP. Sullivan HVAC and Howe HVAC are both under our RFP with Somerville. So we're leveraging that. And then when we get to the contracting, certainly those hard bid results will come to the board due to the contract value.
Thank you. So in other words, to summarize, it's been a while since we've had a contract. Okay.
And then the last group, pre-design, these ones are, I would say, not large projects, but ones that we're engaging. Again, an architect that we have under RFP. There'll be Franklin Gym and auditorium renovations, Southwest Gym renovation, and then East High School roof, a section of that roof. And that would conclude our 22 referendum projects. Obviously, with surplus, we would be revisiting depending on bid results coming this spring.
Any questions? Go ahead, Brian.
I just wanted to share that I emailed the board. I found the City of Green Bay DPW Safe Walk and Bike Plan implementation. There's a lot of lights that were proposed that haven't gone up yet, like a lot of lights that I'm hoping the city can kind of pick up the pace on some of these, because you click off the project to completed project. As a teacher, I'd be sending this back like, you need to get more done, because there's like 7 and there's a lot of red on there.
Yeah, I'd like to see a little bit more urgency.
Well, you can see the map that I sent you from the city. Thanks
Thank
to
you.
Gail telling us that the city had that out. So.
And I'll certainly reach out and get an update if they're still planning on having that done this year. I don't, yeah, I'm not sure how long, what the duration is on those signs. So I'll get another update.
Is it possible to understand or remind us what our contribution was monetarily to that project?
Do you have that, Ken?
I believe it was 1.3 million, but I can double check on that.
And has that been granted or, okay, thank you.
That has not been paid.
Any other questions? Okay. All right. Thank you, Kale. Next is the Clean Energy Advisory Committee update.
Yes. All right, so we had, on October 8th, we had our Clean Energy Committee meeting, which we had set for a workshop with McKinstry. We consolidated two workshops in a 5-part series, 4 and 5, with this meeting. This concludes our workshops with McKinstry as we're prepping for our recommendation to the board from our committee. So I'll just kind of recap what workshops 4 and 5 were, and then kind of some next steps as we look, one for our next meeting, and then as well as that recommendation, steps towards that recommendation. The first piece that we went over, again, this was a little bit of a recap that the team, the committee had spoke about in the first workshop, and that was our benchmarking. So how we are going to measure our progress of these goals, or our recommendation to the board of how we're going to track these goals. For the second time, I shouldn't say that, we brought back the recommendation from our committee that we would look at 2018, 2019 energy use data, and then we would benchmark against that for a number of reasons. That was consensus with the group. And that's looks like what we will be presenting as a recommendation. And then we got into the topics for this workshop, the first being renewable energies. The first was an explanation of geothermal heat pump systems, pros and cons to that system, and reviewing that. The second was on-site solar, so solar arrays, photovoltaics that we have on our sites, pros and cons of that renewable source. And then the third was renewable energy credits. So renewable credits that we could purchase or sell or trade, pros and cons to that towards meeting our greenhouse emissions goals. Then that's kind of concluded that fourth workshop on renewables. Then the fifth workshop was really one that we will not be bringing to recommendation to meet our carbon emission goals. This is waste diversion and recycling. Our chart doesn't have anything, doesn't really state any goals towards that, but there has been a strong push by the committee to maybe look at a different initiative for that, and just another renewable piece that we can look at. So with that, the team reviewed waste reduction goals and policies of similar institutions. They looked at some initial analysis of our school district. They had to make some major assumptions with that just due to lack of data. But again, that could be refined depending on how we track data moving forward. And then finally, looking at best practices and next steps in regards to waste reduction. And then finally, as I stated, we'll be meeting at least one more time as a committee to clean up our recommendation and presentation for the board with the recommendations to meet our carbon emission goals. We will be working to develop greenhouse gas emissions pathways to meet our goals. We will provide an Excel workbook with overall greenhouse gas inventory data. So our existing data and what that looks like. And then finally, again, preparing that presentation to summarize our findings and then define our recommendations for the board prior to that December 30th goal. So with that, I would take any questions.
So Laura had to step out. I'll act as chair until her return. Any questions? All right, hearing none. Thank you, Cal, very much for your updates this evening. We'll move next to the policy and governance section of the agenda and invite Melissa to the table to walk us through policy changes in policy and rules in the 300, 400 series. I've seen worse. Yeah, there's only like 7 revisions and 1 repeal. So
I think I'll take that as a compliment.
you should take it as a compliment.
With that said, I know we started out the 300 and 400 series a while ago, during the course of the 2023 and 2024 school year. Again, these were the largest 2 policy series, and I am very happy to report that we are in the home stretch. There's about 25 left in each series. So I, again, want to thank my colleagues who have been working very diligently. I know this is not a great time of the school year to try and get this work done, but everyone knows how important it is. And with one of our commitments being equity in instruction, this really goes to equity in instruction and making sure that we are all means all and that we're up to date in our policies and procedures. So we keep plugging along. And tonight's a good representation of that commitment to equity. Our first policy we're bringing forth tonight is 342.5 Title I programs for disadvantaged students. This was last updated in 2005, and a lot has changed with our Title I program since then. Lisa Bynum has her program down to a science and is masterful at stretching resources to serve as many children as she can. And so that policy reflects what our legal obligations are and the scope and breadth of our Title I programs here in the district.
Any questions? Okay.
I wasn't sure if you were going to speak, Laura, so I'm
Oh,
sorry.
okay, yeah, no, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm kind of asleep at the wheel here, sorry.
Nope, that's okay. Okay, our next policy that we're bringing forth tonight is currently entitled Extended Instructional Programs, Policy 350. This all last drafted and revised in 2005. Amy Fish is currently overseeing our what we're calling expanded learning programs. This is how DPI refers to them. And since 2005, these programs have taken on, again, a greater breadth and greater meaning and significance here in our district, with intentionality and partnering with community partners to deliver these programs to our students outside of the school day.
Questions, Brian?
This is separate from like an extended school year program or anything that would be falling under a student's IEP, correct?
That's correct. That extended school year is covered in a different policy.
Other questions? Okay.
Okay, policy 353, community instructional opportunities and resources. That falls under really the umbrella of that expanded learning and talks about how we're using those community instructional opportunities and resources and just leveraging our resources here in the district, providing greater clarity as to what the parameters are around those community resources and opportunities.
Questions? All right.
The rule then under that policy, not a lot of change, really a lot of formatting changes and with the changes in structure in the district, recognizing who should be giving that approval, and it really needs to be the building principal.
Questions? Okay, keep going.
Similarly, Rule 2, also not a lot of substantive changes, just a lot of formatting to the rule.
No questions?
Okay, we are proposing to repeal policy 357. Currently, it is a 2-sentence policy, and that language was folded into policy 350 as one of the provisions of that extended instructional program. Sorry, expanded instructional program.
Questions? Okay.
Okay, moving to a completely different area of our policies, student expulsions. Jackie Hauser and Katie Selzer worked on these policies and rules, so I want to thank them for all their work. Really just a little different verbiage change as to better reflect the district and board's philosophy with respect to student expulsions and then the procedures with respect to those expulsions.
Any questions? Okay.
Okay, and then Rule 1, under student expulsions, there has been a lot of changes in the pre-work with respect to those expulsions. We've really streamlined the process for principals and the buildings so that they're not having to do a lot of the legwork with respect to gathering information to send down to district office. We don't require copies anymore. Everything is electronically submitted, just updating that. And then also from David's team's perspective, we've streamlined what those review processes look like. So the rule now reflects that process here in the district.
Questions? Okay.
And then just, it's been reviewed, so now we add review dates, even though we don't make changes, just so that you understand we're not proposing any changes then to Rule 2, which is that expulsion hearing procedure, which is the independent hearing officer.
Okay, any questions in general? Lynn?
I don't have a question, but I just want to, since there were no questions asked, I want to make sure you know, I read it all. I'll bet we all read it all. And I really appreciate the work that went into this. Thank you to your staff.
I'll second that. And reading both the original policies and the red lines, you have to start somewhere. This set of revisions really represents some maturation of our policies, and I appreciate that.
Yep. Thank you, Melissa. All right.
I'll pass the chair back to Laura.
Okay. All right, that concludes our agenda for tonight. Would someone like to read the motion to adjourn into closed session? Go ahead, Lynn.
I move that the board convene into closed session pursuant to Wisconsin statute 19.85, section 1C, considering the employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, to wit, interim superintendent contract.
Second.
Kinsey, is this a voice vote? Go ahead.
Becker,
Aye.
McCoy,
Aye.
Lyerly,
Aye.
Mills,
Aye.
Gerlach,
Aye.
Crossan,
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Okay, we are adjourned into closed session.
You have been watching the Green Bay Area Public School District's Board of Education meeting. Please visit the school district's website, www.gbaps.org, for more information on the district and future meeting dates. If you cannot fully access the information on this video, please let us know the accessibility issue you are having by calling 920-448-2025 or by email at communications@gbaps.org. We will try to provide the information to you in an alternative format and/or make the necessary improvements to make the information accessible.